The United States recently announced more sanctions on Zimbabwe amid the deadly COVID-19 pandemic that is having a negative impact on the Southern African nation. Hello and welcome to this edition of Africa Today, which will also focus on the unprecedented locust invasion in Eastern Africa. The locust invasion is threatening the food supply of tens of millions in the already vulnerable region. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Mubarak Kenya.
U.S. sanctions on Zimbabwe. The United States has announced sanctions on Zimbabwe's state security minister and the southern African country's envoy to Tanzania over claims of human rights violations. The U.S. has defied international calls to waive sanctions imposed on countries like Zimbabwe at this time when the world needs solidarity to combat the COVID-19 pandemic. The poor masses in Zimbabwe continue to suffer due to the sanctions.
Sanctions have caused us damage in Zimbabwe, to the people of Zimbabwe, the companies of Zimbabwe, the schools of Zimbabwe. Wherever we are in Zimbabwe, we are facing hardships because of Britain, America and its allies. So now we are saying it's enough, it's enough.
Now, for more analysis on this, we contacted Mr. Bright Matonga, who is a Zimbabwean politician, a former member of parliament and also the former deputy minister of information. Now, thanks a lot, Mr. Matonga, for your time. Now, why is the United States imposing sanctions on Zimbabwe even after the fall and eventual demise of Mugabe?
Maintaining sanctions on Zimbabwe is about American interests everywhere. In Zimbabwe is to do with the land reform program that was undertaken by the government of Zimbabwe more than 20 years ago. On the other hand, it's also to do with minerals. Zimbabwe is endowed with a lot of minerals from gold, diamonds, platinum, oil and gas.
Bright Matonga, former Deputy Information Minister of Zimbabwe.
Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa blames the sanctions imposed by the U.S. and the European Union for Zimbabwe's economic ills and says they're intended to remove his ZANU-PF party from power. In an address to the 74th session of the General Assembly of the United Nations, the Zimbabwean president called for the immediate and unconditional removal of these illegal sanctions.
These sanctions constitute a denial of the human rights of the people of Zimbabwe to develop and the improvement of their quality of life. Furthermore, the sanctions are slowing down our progress, inhibiting our economic recovery, and punishing the poorest and the most vulnerable in our society.
The Zimbabwean government has strongly objected to the human rights pretext used by the U.S. and other Western countries in imposing sanctions on the country. The U.S. claims sanctions have been imposed on Zimbabwe due to human rights violations. Now, what's your take on this?
The United States is the last country that can talk about human rights, considering its reputation in Asia, in Iran, Iraq, Yemen, in all these other countries. They're doing the same to Venezuela, they're doing the same even to China, but China is a very powerful force. Zimbabwe is not at war with the United States, and the government of Zimbabwe is surprised as to why the Americans are so, they've maintained that. But obviously one understands that they sympathize with the kith and kin, the British, and obviously the European Union, they've been dropped in so that they squeeze the government of Zimbabwe.
Thanks for that, and stay tuned for more.
Meanwhile, there have been claims that land reform programs implemented by former President Mugabe is partly to blame for the current food shortages in Zimbabwe. According to Hilal Elver, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food, the country is on the verge of man-made starvation, which close to 60% of its 14 million population being food insecure. The World Food Program Deputy Country Director in Zimbabwe, Niels Balzer, explains here on some of the reasons for food insecurity in Zimbabwe.
We see a factor or a combination of factors, economic downturn, climate change, and subsequent droughts that have led more than 8 million people into food insecurity. As in WFP, we're looking at ramping up our response over the next couple of weeks to reach almost double of what we have planned.
Is it true that land reforms implemented by the late President Mugabe contributed to the current food insecurity in Zimbabwe?
Zimbabwe experienced a series of droughts in the last sort of 20 years, droughts in a row. So really, land reform did not cause food insecurity. It actually benefited the local farmers.
In another development, the Zimbabwean government is implementing new legislation under which former landowners may opt for repossession or monetary compensation. The new regulations will apply to indigenous farmers whose farms were appropriated, as well as to those whose land was protected by bilateral treaties. President Mnangagwa has assured white farmers in the country that their land will not be taken, calling on them to work together with the government.
We should cease to talk about who owns the farm in terms of color. We should cease talking about that. A farmer, a black farmer, a white farmer is a Zimbabwean farmer.
Why has the Zimbabwean government decided to give back land to white settlers? Has the government given in to pressure from Western countries for sanctions to be lifted?
It's not true that the Zimbabwean government is giving back land to former white commercial farmers. Land reform was never about dispossessing white commercial farmers. Land reform about sharing the abundant millions of hectares of land that we have in Zimbabwe.
President Mnangagwa pledged radical economic reforms after he was sworn in as Zimbabwe's president following the country's elections in 2018. Zimbabweans rejoiced when Mnangagwa succeeded Mugabe, who was forced out by his army in November. But frustration seems to be setting in over lack of improvement in the economy.
This really is as a result of institutions not being able to work, and because of that, if you have national institutions not being able to work, it then becomes a problem. His Excellency Comrade Idi Mnangagwa, on his State of the Nation address, clearly admitted for the first time that it's not going to be easy, it's going to be tough.
Has President Mnangagwa been able to implement the economic reforms he promised during his inauguration?
With the current government of Emerson Mnangagwa, we've been able to record a surplus in terms of our revenue, which we have used to repair and construct roads, to fund agriculture, to fund with El Nino a few years ago, which destroyed the eastern parts of Zimbabwe. But the government was able, with very little assistance from outside, to resettle those people, to build new homes, to construct roads, and feed those people. And with this coronavirus, we've recorded a surplus of more than 500 million Zimbabwean dollars, which we are now using.
Meanwhile, opposition MDC leader Nelson Chamisa, who refuses to recognize Mnangagwa's 2018 electoral victory, has criticized any preparation for the 2023 elections before instituting reforms.
The people voted. We were voted by millions of people. People were cheated. The election was stolen. There was rigging of the outcome.
Tensions between the Zimbabwean government and the opposition continue unabated. Now, what can be done to solve this deadlock?
We've seen Zimbabwean opposition leader supporting government to fight this coronavirus. We hope That's the spirit that they should have had in the first place, they should continue to engage. If you lose an election, it's not easy to lose whatever, but if you lose, you should be able to accept the result and then re-strategize for the coming elections.
And now in this segment of our program, my colleague Sheila Nelima will be presenting you with news and events from across Africa. What do you have today, Sheila?
Thank you, Henia. Hello and welcome to this part of the program. It's Sheila Nelima bringing you news from around Africa. Now, women empowerment continues to soar. Emma Theophilus became the youngest member of parliament in the Namibian government at 23 years of age. This comes after President Geingob appointed her as the Deputy Minister of Information, Communication and Technology. Her appointment followed criticism due to her young age and her lack of experience in the job. However, being a law graduate and activist, she has taken on the role with enthusiasm and stated that she will do her best in representing her fellow youth in Parliament. Now, still on matters uplifting women, a fund that is dedicated to businesses across Western and Southern Africa is ready to embark on its first investments. Alithea IDF, formed in 2014, aims to invest in businesses that are majority owned by women or created to serve women. Priority is given to companies in the agricultural sector and businesses that provide essential services. Following Nigeria's lead, Ghana's Tech Lab has partnered with Young Africa Works to launch a fund, the SLI COVID-19 Challenge. The $10,000 fund aims to mobilize and support shortlisted innovations to provide essential services during and after this pandemic period. It targets local innovations who will receive the grant in addition to a one-month online coaching and a business mentorship to help and develop their products. In other news, the Sudanese Ministry of Finance has raised the minimum civil servants by 700%. This hit a record high in the history of civil service. It also comes amid criticism by economists of the ministry's Resistance and Change Committee that have accused the ministry of failing in dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. They are also pushing for reviews and reforms of the former regime's policies. Now, some good news for tech companies. The Jack Ma Foundation opened applications for Africa Netpreneur Prize 2020. The initiative aims to support 100 African entrepreneurs over 10 years. Last year saw 10,000 applications submitted from 50 African countries, with the finalists sharing a $1 million cash prize. The competition is open till the 9th of June. Now, while most of us are getting depressed of the social distancing and staying at home, animals in the motherland are living large and free, roaming around and enjoying some peace and quiet. Let's have a look at South Africa. Now, this brings us to the end of this part. Visit our social media pages as shown on screen. Give us your views and comments on the program. Do stay tuned. We will be back soon.
Desert locusts have invaded Eastern Africa over the last few months. The locust invasion is threatening the food supply of tens of millions. Now, hundreds of billions, yes, hundreds of billions of locusts have been swarming around the world, primarily in East Africa.
They have been wreaking havoc as they descend on crops and pasture lands, destroying everything in a matter of hours. The scale of the locust outbreak, which now affects 7 East African countries, is unprecedented in recent memory.
For now, Kenya, Somalia, and Ethiopia have been the main countries that have been infested by desert locusts in billions. But then there are also other countries at risk, especially South Sudan, Uganda, Eritrea, which is also infested so far.
According to Keith Cressman, Senior Locust Focusing Officer with the Food and Agriculture Organization, the desert locust crisis traces back to May 2018, when Cyclone Mekunu passed over a vast unpopulated desert on the southern Arabian Peninsula known as the Empty Quarter. We contacted Mr. Cressman for an incisive analysis on the locust invasion. Thanks a lot, Mr. Cressman, for joining us. Now, do you believe that climate change is to blame for the unprecedented in East Africa?
If we're just looking for 3 years or 5 years and saying that there's an increase of cyclones, is that really climate change, or is that just an anomaly in the weather patterns? But I think what's more important is not if it's climate change or not, but if these cyclones continue to increase like we've seen in the last couple of years, then for sure there will be more locust upsurge in East Africa.
That was Keith Cressman, Senior Locust Focusing Officer with the Food and Agriculture Organization.
Latest reports indicate a second wave of massive swarm of locusts is expected to descend on Eastern Horn of Africa countries, causing huge destruction of crops and negatively impact on food insecurity in the region.
The small-scale farmers, it's a very big problem, and for the food security of Kenya, especially after a problem like the coronavirus, how are we going to feed Kenya? All of our produce is for local consumption, and yeah, I think everyone needs to take this seriously and support everywhere you can, because it's a very big problem.
How will this locust invasion affect food security in already vulnerable countries like Somalia, Kenya, and Ethiopia?
The current situation is extremely dangerous to northeastern Africa. We are now at the beginning of the rainy season, and the rains are good. So this is very good for the farmers and for the pastoralists, but it's also very good for the locusts. And so that means, of course, that we're expecting another generation of breeding. And with every generation of breeding by desert locusts, they increase 20 times in numbers. So you can, I think, imagine what kind of problems are going to be faced in these 3 countries.
African countries lack enough resources to adequately respond to the locust invasion. Now, the Kenyan government set aside around $2 million to combat the invasion. This allocation is clearly not enough to effectively deal with the problem.
We have sent enough aircrafts to spray these areas to deal with the locusts. My brother CS Munya has been in Isiolo, where many of the aircrafts were stationed to go across northern Kenya to deal with the locusts. And sufficient resources have been deployed and air assets to ensure that we deal with this menace.
Have we seen adequate and effective response by African countries to the locust invasion?
Well, you know, this is a huge challenge, in fact, because you have to remember that some of these countries, they haven't seen locusts for a really long time. For example, Kenya. Kenya, in the last 70 years, has only seen locusts twice. They saw it in 2007 and they saw it in 1957. So, of course, they're completely unprepared for locusts. They don't have the equipment, they don't have the knowledge, the expertise. They don't have trained staff, and so all of this makes it very difficult to respond quickly and effectively to locust invasions. And then when those locusts stay in the country and breed, then to the breeding populations.
Thanks for that, and stay tuned for more.
The Desert Locust Control Organization for Eastern Africa is warning that the situation in Kenya could get serious because the swarms, particularly those in Somalia, could soon enter the country. The organization's director, Stephen Njoka, said they're doing all they can to have the situation under control.
In Ethiopia, the organization has deployed 2 aircrafts, and they have been operating there since the month of August. And up to now, the locusts are still there. In Kenya, the locusts came here on the 28th of December, and immediately, working with the Minister of Agriculture, we deployed our 2 aircrafts.
Has the Food and Agriculture Organization been able to raise enough funds to assist countries facing this unprecedented locust invasion?
3 months ago, FAO called on the international community and appealed for some $76 million to help start these control operations. 1 month later, that appeal increased to $138 million, and now it's up to about $151 million. Now, fortunately, the international community has provided much needed assistance, funding for the control operations, but there still is a gap of about $38 million.
Great to have you back. In this segment, we are going to delve into our social media activities. Few weeks ago, we had an episode on Africa's poaching crisis, and we brought an argumentative discussion on Africa being traditional hunters, then ethical conservation is foreign to them, thereby justifying the poaching in the continent. Our viewers commented as follows. Abigail Haimba said that this could be true or not, considering most of the time the main poachers are usually foreigners, from what I have seen in the past. Plus, right now, there is a need for conservation since most of the wildlife is twiddling. On matters of licensed hunting, she added that, I don't think it's legal. Whatever governments are doing is just wrong. Controlling which wildlife and from what? I know we have rhinos that are almost extinct and something is killing them, let alone poaching. Right now, governments in Africa should work on protecting wildlife. Jemima Muli stated that, well, I don't think it's true that poaching is allowed. Maybe corruption is the cause for the exploitation. Julie Kemi added that poaching is not allowed. This multi-billion business has seen the world lose its species. Animals die because of poaching. It's simply wrong. On trophy hunting being justified, she stated that, no, they aren't. At the end of the day, if we don't conserve our wildlife, all of them will be extinct, just like the dinosaurs. Well, that's all for now. We appreciate each and every comment and we value your feedback. Again, visit our social media pages and interact with us. Feel free to share your views, images, and videos and join us as we tell the African story. Goodbye for now.
Here at Africa Today, we'll keep you posted on efforts to deal with the growing threat of desert locusts in Eastern Africa. And on that note, we come to the end of this edition of Africa Today. From me, Mubarak Kenya, and my team, it's goodbye for now.